Right, this is episode what, Bertie? Episode 82?
Episode 82.
Or
Scotty's
season
all over
2, episode 30.
Yeah.
We're way up there in season 2 now.
Exactly.
And we had Fiona Sherlock in. Thank God the episode saved.
Yeah.
Or else that would have been a totally different intro.
You'll have to check out Sunday's video. We see if we get the footage from Scotty almost crapping himself.
Oh my God. Alright, so would you like to name some of your books so people will know?
Sure. So Supper for Six is going to be out in October. And you can pre-order it from all of our wonderful independent bookshops like Antonia's and Trim. It's a mystery set in Mayfair 1970s, but Navan and Bective are mentioned in it in my author's notes, so it all comes back to Navan.
Up Navan.
Bective seems to be coming up quite a lot in our podcast recently, doesn't it?
Yeah. Anybody else from Bective want to come on?
We've got it. I think we've covered everyone out there now at this stage. All right, so will we go about naming this lovely podcast?
Let's name it. Episode 82.
All right, okay, so here's my suggestion. You get to have a suggestion as well if you want.
I have one.
All right.
Excellent.
Now, I've got to set the scene here for this one.
Oh, here we go.
All right. So this is... I'm going to put on an Italian accent.
If you have to explain it, I'm not sure it's going to be good.
So here we go. There's been a murder, Luigi. Just the Fiona Sherlock. Just the Fiona Sherlock. No?
There's many different layers to that.
That's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Layers, yeah. Not sure the Italians would agree with the accent.
We should edit that part out.
Well, yeah, should I just delete that part? Yeah. Okay, Bertie, go on.
I was going to go with The Game is Afoot.
Oh, nice sense of suspense there.
Yeah.
Right, John, go on.
Oh, I'm struggling, to be honest. And I'm trying to keep it within the Sherlock, because your name is Sherlock, and Sherlock Holmes.
That's where I went, yeah.
I just can't think of one. I can't think of one. My mind's I have a writer's block.
Oh!
That's not a writer's block. That's not.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, I'm saying it's a writer's
You're not writing. You're not writing.
I'm writing now.
It's just a John block.
As we speak.
Right, Fiona.
So he's going to call it a John block.
John block. No, let's not call it John block. Fiona, what's your suggestion for the name for the podcast?
This is neither as weighted in suspense as Bertie's suggestion, nor weighted in humour as yours. I was going to keep it very clean. Murder on Trimgate Street.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, because we are on Trimgate Street.
Yeah, I like that actually. Yeah, that's very good.
This is amazing.
Okay, all right, let's call it that. So, this is episode 82, or
82.
season 2, episode 30.
Murder on Trimgate Street.
Yeah, what will be this? What will be that? Thinking of the topic that you could have had. The only game that makes me feel so alive. I'm guessing for 30, it could be only 5. Getting them all would be a superpower. You can get it every week on the JB Waffle Hour. 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 JB Waffle Hour.
Oh, yeah. Love that song.
Yes, you do. Okay, let's
Awesome.
I think it's getting longer every week.
Thank you. Bertie, would you like to introduce today's episode?
Hello, everybody. It's episode 82.
Bertie?
82. I hope you enjoyed episode 81 last week. Axeman Origans, for some strange reason. Somebody misspelled origins last week on the podcast.
We had to roll with it.
Yeah, because I had all the videos done before I realised. Now, I know it slipped by my eyes too.
4 times, let's just say 4 times.
3, because I noticed it on the 4th video. But, like, I was just copying and pasting from what you said.
That's really no excuse.
It's the WhatsApp
It
group
isn't.
all over again.
He missed it. I missed it once. He missed it 4 times.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I spelt it right when we were doing the actual episode as well.
Okay, but what way is it spelled now on... Because I like, cohesiveness.
It's all over the place.
Is organs a word? Organs?
Organs.
It is now.
It's
Well, it's a state in
it's a
America.
state,
Except that's O
That's
or
Oregon.
Oregon, yeah.
I put it with an E.
EG.
EG, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we talked to Benny about Axe Throne.
Yes.
That was a good episode,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was interesting, right? He also works in the zoo, but we didn't talk to him about that.
It's another
We
podcast.
completely forgot.
Yeah.
They've gone too wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Axe Throne was always probably got him on.
Well,
That's the moneymaker.
Yeah. was quite interesting hearing his part of it, because we were talking about axes as weapons, and he was like, "Oh, I don't see them as weapons; they're as tools."
Yeah.
It was a very interesting theory at that end of.
I really wanted to get into the zoo thing.
Yeah.
Why didn't you bring it up then?
Because the axe thing was very interesting.
It was.
But we were just too late. There was too much to go through with that lad.
Yeah.
If you have a moment of your very precious time. Oh my God, I'm choking.
Oh my lord.
And I left my drink in the car. Make sure to rate, like, share, follow, subscribe to the podcast wherever you may see it. It's fine. No, I don't want coffee.
Some coffee. Okay, will we get right into it?
Going to go over to the corner here now.
I'm not going to ask about weekends or anything. We're getting straight into it.
Okay.
Is that all right?
No, I had my best weekend ever.
No.
But anyway, it's okay.
Don't want to hear about it. So today with us, we have writer and entrepreneur Fiona Sherlock. How are you?
Hi, Fiona. Welcome.
I'm good. This is my first podcast.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm a podcast virgin.
Actually?
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
That's
right. So actually, I was going to ask you something about the.
got thrown there.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you something, but we'll wait till later on to do that. So, tell us about you. What?
Tell us your origins.
Yeah, tell us about your origins. That sounds wrong.
Proper neologisms here. Going on here. So yeah, I'm a writer of many different genres, primarily crime. I've 2 books out at the minute: 12 Motives for Murder, which is an audiobook that features a detective called Elizabeth Chalice. It's sort of set in the 1950s, all around 12 different suspects and what each of their motives for murder essentially is. And another one called Death Visits January, that's set in RD, about a kind of a tipsy antiques dealer.
Right.
So crime is kind of where I started, working on both of the sequels for those books at the minute. I've also published a couple of poetry collections, including one via NFT, with thanks to funding from Meath County Council Arts Office, which I'm required to say anytime I mention it. I also create murder mystery games, which segues nicely with the books, and I've been able to create games for a lot of celebrities, for weddings and engagement parties and different things like that. But mostly I sell to American school teachers, and you know those extra people who always will go one step too far, or they'll always they take the most effort to create like an event. Yeah, that sort of person hosts a murder mystery party. Those kind of extra people who just like having parties and like picking matching napkins and creating special playlists and menus and everything to accompany a costume filled evening. So sold about 100,000 of those during COVID.
Janie.
That's incredible.
How much of it do you like? Do they give like the details of who's going to be there, like numbers wise, and then you just like set the whole thing up? Or
I have on Etsy I sell these ready-made packs, so they're for they kind of counter different numbers, and then for the kind of A-listers, they do get their own party depending on what the requirements.
So you don't have to physically go to this party; it's in a box, and then there's instructions. Is it?
Pretty much.
And so I've never played the kind of game before. I've never even done a mystery tour. I know there's one up in the Wax Museum. I've never done that one. But so basically, you open up your box and it says who's the murderer, and then that's the murderer. Like, or one person knows the game. Is it?
Well, the way I write them is that it's a surprise for all the players.
Wow, that's like that. That's even better.
I have a little inbuilt mechanism there. So you open your box, you have your invitations, your character scripts, some evidence that everybody has to deduce in the course of the night, and the fun is really, like, for me anyway, getting dressed up and people putting on like funny accents, and I've even seen people who've grown Ronnies for their part.
Right.
So then everyone tends to gather maybe over dinner or drinks. They play out their roles. They have to try and deduce from what other people are saying and the evidence to who the killer is. And then at the end of the game, usually over a Black Forest Gâteau or some profiteroles, they're going to guess who the killer is. So they take turns to go around the room to say, well, I think Bertie is the murderer because he has no alibi and he had it in because of this reason, and he had a shotgun in the back of the car and he was murdered by a bullet.
Yeah.
So that's the way those kind of parties go. And I started to write them because I actually really just liked playing them.
Yeah.
And I found that the other games that were out there had all been pretty much written in the 70s, so were just a little bit off colour.
Most of them, the killer gets the card, and then they just have to play dead for the whole thing.
Well, in my one,
Yeah, so
usually the
you're-
murder takes place already. So you might walk into a party and the people have good crack creating mini crime scenes that might have like a chalk outline or a bit of blood there, whatever. So there's not the drop down dead moment live. People find that intimidating.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when people are reluctant to get involved in a murder mystery game,
You're better like a crime scene that you have to try and
yeah, and
deduce what's going on.
everyone's like comes in on an even footing with a booklet, and there's not too much amateur dramatics.
Yeah.
What came first then, the book or the game?
Um,
Were you a writer primarily, or were you a game writer that said I'll write a book?
No, I'd self-published a novel. I had a conversation with myself one New Year's Eve, probably really one New Year's Day. That was like, look, if you want to be a writer, I worked in PR at the time. I did that for about 15 years, and I said to myself, if you want to be a writer, like, you actually have to sit down and write a book.
Yeah.
And I did that. It took me about a year to do it. I self-published it because I got impatient, and it probably wasn't great. You know, I made a few mistakes in it.
It's like the first pancake.
Yeah, and then I started writing the games because I didn't like the other ones that were out there, and word got around through friends of friends, and people were asking me for the kits and the PDFs, and somebody said, you know, you can sell those on Etsy.
Right.
Or you could sell them, and I said, oh sure, I'll give that a lash. So I was kind of, and then I was writing my second novel, which then I did get a book deal for, and I did get an agent for. So they were all slowly germinating over the course of maybe like 2 to 5 years, when I was still working, having babies, all that crack. And it was really in 2020 when 12 Motives for Murder was published, Death Visit January was published. I started writing for the Sunday Independent, and the games really got very busy or very popular because we were all sitting waiting for our arse cheeks to go numb, playing table quizzes on Zoom. So that's where there was kind of an added appetite. So that's really when it all properly kind of came together.
And so, what did you do in college? Was it a case of in all the way through secondary school you went to Mercy and Navan, as you said, all the way through secondary school you had this thing for English, you loved poetry, and then you went to college and studied it, and you ended up in PR, but you really wanted to be a writer, or what was the pathway to that?
Yeah, no, I was one of those losers who was obsessed with like Dead Poet Society.
Nice,
and
yeah, okay.
would burn incense in my room and write love poems. I would always want to be a writer.
Right.
My granny, who's actually 102, is a poet herself, and she used to get me to write out. She would speak some of the verse, and she would get me to like write it out, so I'd notice where the different beats were. And she always used to send me off up the fields with a book and say good luck. And so I always liked writing, I always liked reading, and I did English and journalism. I did English in Trinity after the Leaving Cert, and then I did journalism in DCU. And yeah, I did do journalism for a while. Like, I interned with Hot Press and the Dubliner magazine, which was a great little magazine. It's a shame it's gone. And I was getting day shifts in a couple of the papers here and there, but you know, was kind of height of the recession, and as I went to the dark side of public relations, because I just wanted to buy like a nice handbag for myself from time to time, or rent an apartment. And yeah, but I always had like different projects on the go. I ran a business about fashion at the races for a while.
Right.
I ran a couple of like random afternoon tea events that basically cost me money to have people go for afternoon tea.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, Bertie likes the afternoon tea, in fairness.
Oh no, I was saying about ideas costing you money.
Oh, right, okay.
Not working out.
It
Like
was a
Business
perfect blend
ideas.
of both there.
Then the writing was always there, and it was only when I started to get my head around it actually being a possibility that it's a self-belief thing, and like, you know, when you have to beat your own limitations. I could have done that straight out of college. Like, I could have started writing, but I just didn't believe that it was actually a viable career option.
Yeah. And then, so what was the first spark? Was it in and around the recession that you were like, this has to take off now, or I'm not going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, like, I was journalism, I was doing journalism at ECU, and a lot of that was features writing. So that's the like of Hunter S. Thompson, who goes and gets absolutely trolleyed and writes about it and has the most colourful exploits, you know, and Tom Wolfe and a lot of those really cool writers that they're, you know, that vibe I was really into.
Yeah.
Because it's somewhere between fiction. It uses a lot of the tools and techniques of fiction, but it's ultimately non-fiction. So, and actually I've kind of come back to the creative non-fiction recently. I'm doing a master's in the minute in Cambridge, and so I'm writing a book about Mary Lavin. She was a writer that was from Bective, but I didn't really want to write like an ordinary biography, so I've sort of made it a little bit like a game where the reader is essentially like sitting beside her in the car and can like see her and smell her and listen to the radio. Which takes a lot of research, because you're like, what did that sort of car look like, and you know, what road would you drive from Dublin to Navan in 1954, and you know, all that level of research.
Do you consider that? I think every writer would have like a quirk, or like, would you consider like the game scenario of a book, would that be your quirk that you kind of integrate into your books, or what would your quirk be when you're writing that makes that someone, let's say, read your book but not knew the author, but they go, this sounds like Fiona, you know?
I think you know, the role of the reader, people have been playing around with the role of the reader for a long time, and you know, this old-fashioned sense of, you know, the fourth wall under the proscenium arch, which is when the actors on the stage are talking to the audience and everyone knows what's happening, but the actors wouldn't necessarily say, now we all know what's going on here. So people have been playing around with that for a long time, and you know, there's been the Nancy Drew books over the years, and even Agatha Christie toyed a lot with you know, point of view and perspective and who was talking and how much an unreliable narrator would know. So I suppose it's continuing on that tradition of trying to find a new way in to tell a story. Like Supper for Six, the book that's out in October, it is a fictional crime podcast. It has the same detective as 12 Motives for Murder, but it's her tapes are used basically as the kind of raw material for a crime podcast. And I really enjoyed writing that, because I obviously enjoy listening to podcasts, and it's become such a part of our narrative and how we tell stories and how we communicate, that I wanted to kind of push that a little bit and toy around with that. And part of that is now, because it's a podcast, the podcast host is breaking that fourth wall and directly talking to the listeners to say, you know, and now we'll hear the next from, and what do you think? So I do like that sense of kind of merging the role of reader and author, and like I have done some work in the metaverse as well, and that's where I find really interesting the opportunities to actually have a story. My kind of vision for that would be to have like a Supper for Six in a book that you can read, Supper for Six in like an audiobook you can listen to, but actually like you can walk into the house to 26 Bruton Square where the book is set, and you can see where everyone's sitting down.
Fly on the wall kind of thing, is it?
Yeah, but they can lift up the butter dish and see what's in there.
Wow, so fully immersive experience.
Yeah, so I'm kind of doing a bit of work on that as well.
You'll have to build that virtual world technically, so you'll have to team up, is it? Or would you be experiencing that kind of stuff yourself? You build it?
No, I'm working with some people to explore the execution of that.
And then putting the podcast together, did you have to go about casting people for that, or what way did that work?
That will be the next stage. So because my publisher is Hodder and Stoughton, so when we were casting for 12 Motives for Murder, I did get audition tapes basically sent to my email, and I had to listen to, because there's 12 suspects, 12 characters in 12 Motives. So like I still had to make sure that the voices were distinct enough. So the detective is British, but she's from Bolton, so she's a northern lass. God, I can't believe I even tried to do that.
It was pretty good.
So yeah, no, I do get to have a listen to the audition tapes, and you know, I'm glad I did, because there was one Irish in inverted comma accent that was terrible. Right. So at least I could make the point against that.
And do you put out there the kind of people you want, or is the auditions come and then you're like, oh, that actually sounds like, in my mind, who like that character would actually sound like?
Well, I have an amazing audio editor in Hodder, so she looks after everything from the scripting of the music, to sourcing the actors. So she'll use professional narrators, audiobook narrators, and often they actually have their own following, because people might like to hear a particular voice, and they'll actually search books that have been read by, say, for example, George Waitman. He played one of the characters in 12 Motives for Murder, but he has a following of his own. So
just that they like the sound of his voice, is it?
They like the sound of his voice, and actually people hate books where authors read their own work.
Right, okay.
I'm the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, the exception might be if it's Prince Harry or a big name, but generally that's a big turn off for readers or listeners.
I listened to Ant Middleton's 3 books, and he obviously narrated them or read them or whatever, but I don't think I could have listened to them if it wasn't him.
That's where that kind of level of truth and integrity, when it is somebody where you're used to hearing their voice, like you hear his voice all the time, say with Prince Harry, that it would be weird if it wasn't them narrating.
I think biographies should always be their own voice, if they're still alive, obviously. But for fiction thing, it would be great to hear different characters say different voices, true, put a bit of depth into it, like, or even crime podcasts. I love listening to crime podcasts, and it's always better when there's a different voice, or they're putting on, like, they're really putting a good bit of power behind the voice when there's a killer talking, or
they know how to build the tension
and
suspense.
The tension with the voice. That's what I like about crime podcasts. Like, it's the same Drewley voice the whole way through that does a lady's voice and a man's voice. It's not the same. Yeah, you need to break it up.
Get everyone G'd up.
Yeah. On vodka.
And so, come here. Why crime and murder? What drew you towards that whole world?
I think it might have been a case of nominative determinism.
All right.
Like Sherlock is actually my own name.
Yeah.
We always had Sherlock Holmes books at home. Like, literally spent my entire teenage years with people saying, "No shit, Sherlock."
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
I remember when people used to say that.
So I think I was kind of tuned into I'd read all the books at an early age, so I was aware of all the kind of like genre tropes and.
Yeah.
And I also love golden age detective fiction like Agatha Christie, and that's also the sort of stuff that would have been knocking around the gaff, that an unlimited supply of Agatha Christie. And I also like the sort of mathematical aspect to crime writing, because everyone has to have a means, a motive, an opportunity. It's all quite mathematical and it's all quite fixed, and within those boundaries, actually, I find it's often more of a challenge to push them and twist them and, slightly turn the story and create something new. So like Agatha Christie, obviously the queen of crime, and that term is copyrighted to her.
Oh, right, is it?
Lest anybody else try to ever use it.
Wow.
The different permutations. So, for example, she would have one book, Five Little Pigs, where each chapter was from a different suspect's perspective.
Oh, cool.
And it's a little bit like the Last Duel, where that you see the same set of events, and it's actually a common enough trope now, but she was the first person to do that,
right,
where you see the same thing happen from the point of view of 5 different people, and you have to try and figure it out. When she wrote Who Killed Roger Ackroyd, the narrator who's meant to be investigating the crime is actually the killer. Sorry, that is a spoiler alert, but it's not top of the.
I'm not going to read it now. Then
it's not top of the charts at the minute.
Right.
But that unreliable narrator, which we're kind of more used to now, that people were horrified, like absolutely outraged. So I suppose that opportunity to really turn things upside down appealed to me.
Yeah. So no history in crime whatsoever.
None.
Do you want to tell us about some of your first one, the first book that you wrote? Is this the first one that was released, preserved? Is that right?
So as I debuted during lockdown, some of the books came out as ebooks first and audiobooks first, and then the paperbacks came basically when the bookshops reopened. So we kind of tried a few different titles. So the first book that was actually released was 12 Motives for Murder, and that came out in 2020, and that was an audiobook and ebook just before Christmas. Now, I only started writing that June. I started writing that in the Rotunda.
No way.
A couple of days after having a C-section.
Wow. And then the audiobook and everything you had organised and arranged. That's incredible.
Well, that's the one good thing about COVID was that, you know, there were certain areas looking to kind of respond in an agile way. So my publisher had set up essentially an audio studio at the time, and their kind of focus was to turn around interesting audiobooks very quickly during the pandemic, because the growth in audio listenership was so great to kind of capitalise on that. So that meant that they could move in a way that traditional publishing wouldn't and couldn't and doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, the traditional process, which I went through with my Irish publishers, with Poolbag, you know, you go looking for an agent. It took me a year to get an agent. And then once she had a look over the book, she sent it out to different publishers. And that took another 8 months. And then, you know, by the time you go through edit and get your cover designed or whatever, that could be another 16 months. So such a short time frame was great for 12 Motives. But it wasn't actually the first book I'd written.
If you were going to bring out a book as, like, as you say, an actual book, physical copy, you're after saying, what, 8 months, 16 months?
It's a long time.
Jesus, it is.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
So the paperback to accompany that was published 10 months later in the October, in time for the following Christmas. So it does take
That's not through no fault of your own, really. It's just that's the process.
It's on someone's desk, like they have a pile high of different books to try and go through. And
well, to be honest, the delay in the paperback was really because the bookshops were closed and everyone was hedging their bets about you know, when they were going to, especially with debut authors, it's harder to, you know, reach a new audience, and actually exposure in the bookshop is very important. But in terms of like the broader publishing industry, sometimes they can move very quickly. And then, you know, like there's just such a demand and so many amazingly talented writers that, you know, nobody wants to miss one either. But the agents and the people reading the submissions, they're completely swamped, like completely swamped.
And I'd imagine, as you're saying, with COVID, I'd imagine there's maybe millions of more brand new writers during COVID because they're just bored at home.
Lot of COVID books.
Yeah.
There was a lot of COVID books written. But ultimately, you know, if somebody has a very strong voice, I think a good agent or good editor will be able to see through, oh, this is just COVID-y stuff, and hear the voice. You know, we've all read books that kind of get you straight away, and you're just there with the character. And I know that that's the sort of thing that agents, anyway, particularly want.
Yeah.
And I actually think that, speaking of transmissible diseases, when my agent had an open day in Dublin, and I said, by hook or by crook, I'm going to that.
Yeah.
But at the time I had scarlet fever, and I mean, it was bad. I was like drenched in sweat. My temperature was like 39 degrees.
Genie.
So like I dragged myself out of bed and went down to the Holiday Inn in O'Connell Street, but I wanted to try and get their attention, but I was like, I basically fainted twice and like
That'll get your attention anyway.
and like sweated through my clothes. Like I had a big patch of my back, but anyway, I managed to get the attention of my agent and get to pitch the story to her. So yeah, it was.
And that's the difference, the determination that someone could have. Like if you were just say, stay at home, that's, you probably would have gone a different direction. Would that be right?
I suppose so. Yeah. I mean,
It's
you
amazing.
do need to just sit down and write the book. Like,
and how long did it take from the start of the book to the end of the book?
to write it depends. So like when I wrote 12 Motives, it took me about 3 months to write it, in a very intense way, although it was a bit shorter than a normal book because audiobooks are. A regular kind of 90,000 page book would probably take me more like 4 or 5 months to write, and I need to run away from it as far as I possibly can, for a couple of months before I go back and edit it a couple more
So mad
times.
that you wrote in that time, because like you're saying there's 12 suspects. That's 12 characters that you have to write that people can connect with. Like generally what romantic novels are kind of just 2 people that you have to write about, but you've 12 people to write about.
Yeah.
That's mad.
so is there a lot of
And
now
a victim.
The longest thing I ever wrote was a thesis, so it's not exactly a book. But do you have to go do all your research first, or do you like develop it as you're writing it, or do you have like a stack of things that like you've gone and researched and you want to make sure you add all them into the book as you're writing it? or
There-
is it just comes to you as you're doing it?
There's two types of writers. There's plotters and pantsers. So pantsers are people who fly by the seat of their pants and they're just like, whatever, come and come.
Yeah.
And then plotters are people who will have multiple Excel spreadsheets with characters, past lives, history and everything. I would be closer to a pantser than a plotter, but I use some plotting tools because of just, I find if I don't have a clear enough plan, especially when there's so many characters and so many permutations and so many potential endings, that I'll just end up getting kind of lost and have to do more editing work in the end. So I do try and keep the simple, like one Excel spreadsheet that I can look at.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, I do have to kind of like go back and check. But I do find that once I have the overall like story arc developed and I know who the characters are, that I kind of can let go a little bit. And to be honest, when I was writing 12 Motives, I kind of nearly felt like I was like downloading it from elsewhere. It was just, I had a newborn baby, so I was like writing or sleeping for 4 hours and getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning to write for an hour or two. So I was in this weird soup of baby and writing.
Yeah.
And I think it actually released a lot of the kind of blocks that I think sometimes creative people can have, because it was just this and this. They're the only things you're doing right now.
And I'm sure they're not listening. Sorry, Scotty.
No,
I'm sure they're not listening. But did you base any of the characters off people that you know?
Writers are cannibals.
Yeah.
We steal little bits of this person and little bits of that person and nibble them all away and store them in a big warehouse that, we go and take something off the shelf and put it in a pot and mix it in with that person's temper, that person's eyes, and mix it all together. I wouldn't say that I have like wholeheartedly like lifted a person from real life and put them into a book.
They'll
I
read it
think,
and go, that's me.
Yeah.
yeah, they would. But it's funny how people, like, I don't know everyone I've ever met has done in their lives, or all the people that they know. And I've had so many people say to me like, oh yeah, well you must have heard about my auntie because she was very like that character. And I'm like, no, like that's actually a coincidence. And people will look at scenes and see things that maybe not be there. Yeah,
they'll see parts of themselves in the characters that you make.
But that's also good writing.
Yeah. So you're Murakami, his process is that he wakes up at 4 a.m, he goes for a 10k run, and then he comes back and he says that the most productive time that he has is from say 5 until 7 in the morning. He just writes all the way through there, and that's religiously what he does. And do you have a process like that where you go, okay, this is my writing time, this is when I'm most productive, or do you just kind of go, as you say, I'll just go by the seat of my pants and whenever it comes out, it comes out?
Now that I'm not in COVID with a newborn, I do have a little bit more control over my life and my diary. So I generally prefer to write in the morning. I would set aside a couple of hours to do like kind of deep work, and that's where I like literally close everything else and write for 2 or 3 hours. I am a big fan of the old morning routines. I do like an early start. Now I wouldn't go for a 10k run. I feel like that would build up too much resistance. I do like a little meditation, have a cup of tea, do like 10-minute yoga, and then I start writing. I feel like if I leave it hanging too long, I'm like get antsy about it and I just want to get cracking. And then I usually like drop the kids to school and come back and do another maybe hour or two. And then in the afternoon I just don't even try and write. Like I'll just do emails or Facebook or
You ever be
whatever.
driving and like think of a plot and you have to like, pull the car over to write down?
Those little nuggets do come occasionally. And I'd say I've probably had about 10 of them. And when they come, I would stop the car and write it down. I'd record it on my phone.
You have to, don't you?
Yeah, but it's also my job, so I sit down at the desk at that time and I have to work and I have to write, and I can't just wait around for the cherubs of inspiration to arrive.
It comes a bit naturally to you then, because that's obviously what's in you to do the writing and the typing and things like that, because it obviously is a very hard thing. Because I watched the Will Smith documentary and he was writing a book and it was about himself. But he found it so hard to sit down, and he was only telling whoever was writing the book his stories, and like the attention that span, it would just go, he'd be in for an hour and then he's gone, and then he'd blow it off another day. So is it just that it's just kind of natural in you, or do you have to work at it to try and like nail down, right, this is the 2 hours, this is what I have to get done, and lists and things? Or did you say that it just comes to you and you start typing like?
I mean, I have to work at it. There's some days where it feels like I'm bleeding onto the page just to get a couple of words that are awful.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the days where it comes and it flows and you're loving it and loving life. But it's really just discipline that's kind of got me to stick with those rougher days and come up with a strategy. So I might be struggling with a scene where I'm like, okay, I have to get this character to get that envelope into their hand and get over to, you know, that shop and meet this person in the shop. And I might be struggling with writing it nicely, and just be like, I'll write A to B, she gets the envelope, she walks over there, blah blah blah, and then that I bring myself to a place where I can have a bit of crack again, where I'm like, right, we're going to a Cayley now, let's go, you know. So I've kind of developed those strategies, but I haven't seen that Will Smith documentary. But I suppose when you're writing autobiography, there's a lot to unpack, and like, you know,
yeah, because I'd see him, because he's like an actor and a musician, that he'd have like the discipline to be in with the writer and stuff and go. And it was a documentary who actually was losing weight. I think that's where the documentary, and it was just following him around. And it just goes to show, like, even though he's so committed in like being a good actor and a good musician and things like that, that it just doesn't come naturally to him to be sitting there to be telling his stories, even though he wasn't actually the one typing. And you think that the easiest kind of writing would be the one where you're just telling your stories, that you don't have to make up the characters or give their history and know their history and things like that, to kind of knit them all together in like the scenes when you're writing and stuff. And I just thought it was interesting that it must be really hard, because you would have thought like Will Smith would have been able to do it.
Yeah. But I suppose, like, I think we do write our own histories. We rewrite our own versions of histories. And something that I kind of came across, and I was looking into seeing what are my limiting beliefs, where am I limited. And I remember, you know, a teacher telling me, like, you're never going to make any money writing. Like, you need to cop on to yourself. You're not going to, this is not actually an option for you. And so I kind of told myself that story. So, and then when I remember the past, you can remember things differently and rewrite it and think of all the people who were like, oh, you're a great writer and best of luck with things. So I can see how that would be really difficult for somebody to write their own autobiography, to tease out those details and be like, well, will I position my aunt nicely, or we're only getting on now, will I tell them the unvarnished truth? Like, how many bridges do you burn? Because who are you protecting? You know, so I think that would be kind of a loaded challenge to have. But also at the same time, he's not waiting for publisher royalties to buy his groceries. That's a different motivation as well, you know.
And bringing you back to your books and your characters, do you have, say, an overall arc for all of these characters? Do you have something in mind, say 10 books from now, where you're like, this is how this is going to end, or this is what I'm going to do with these characters? Or is it just, we'll see what happens to them the next time?
There is an overarching, so my two main detectives, January Quayle is my Irish antiques journalist, and January arrived into my sitting room. I was living in Stoneybatter at the time. She arrived into my sitting room basically fully formed, with a red bob, drinking a glass of creme de menthe, smoking a consulate cigarette, and carrying a big antique book under her arm. And she just arrived, and she's been such a gift and such a presence in my life, that, you know, so she's struggling with a lot of things basically relating to her own past that she's not dealing with, and that she has to ultimately begin to deal with. So I have a 3-book deal for her, but I have a much longer story arc, which is all related to her healing and her copping onto herself, and, you know, the ups and downs that accompany that. And I'm actually writing a TV series set with January as the kind of lead, so that charts kind of her journey to healing. And similarly, Elizabeth Chalice, who's my kind of British wartime nurse detective, she has a similar sort of arc. And so Supper for Six, that's coming out in October, that's set in 1977, which was a really big jump from when the first book was set, which was in 1953. So the first time we meet Elizabeth, she's 36 and she's flirty, and, you know, she's having lots of fun in like 1950s Italy. But then we meet her as a much older lady in a different position. And funnily, doing that has actually left me with a lot of scope for the intervening years, and I've had to think about, well, what has actually happened to her in those essentially 25 years. So, you know, there is a question though with detective characters that there's a case to be made that detectives don't really grow, that they should essentially sort of stay the same, and then just the mysteries change. If you think about Inspector Morse or even Sherlock Holmes, you know, there's an appetite, there's not going to be huge growth. I think that readers have sort of changed a little bit. But like I will say, like Harry Bosch, the Michael Connolly detective, like I honestly thought he was less crack when he stopped drinking, but the character kind of had to do it. He couldn't just keep making a balls of things because he was locked.
That is the persona you get of detectives anyway, isn't it? Smoking a cigar and drinking Jameson,
troubled
whiskey, brown bag,
exactly,
and big trench coat, you know, but could just solve a crime in 2 minutes. Like that's my persona in my mind of detectives like that. But you have to try and break that mold when you're writing one.
I think you do have to try and break the mold when you're writing them, but I think sometimes one of the reasons why detective fiction is so popular is that we all feel ourselves as having some inherent flaws and insecurities, and that to see them manifest so obviously for somebody else, they're almost our kind of sin eaters. That's this medieval concept where people would go and
put the bread, and your man would come and eat the bread when the
sins are gone. Sins are gone. Yeah.
I learned that from Outlander.
Outlander has a lot to teach, all right. So I think people like this sort of, and we live quite sanitized, safe lives these days. Like if you think about humanity and the struggle for survival at the start, you know, people were murdering big old oxes, and you know, life was bloody and brutal and short. And you know, up until 100 years ago, we were fighting. There was blood still being shed in that kind of, and there still is, of course, in many places today. But I think for many people, life is a lot more settled and more domesticated and safe. But I sort of feel like there's still this human need for the dark or the deep or the unseen. I think that's why people like
you're saying
crime fiction.
There's a murderer in all of us, basically, waiting to get out.
Yeah,
like,
I think
in a serious sense, like our own tribal feelings of it would have been survival of the fittest and stuff like that. So you'd have to kill your neighbour in order to survive. Is that kind of the scenario you're talking about? As in, we all have
absolutely.
that in us.
Want to live beside John?
No, I'm not moving to Kildare.
I don't have any more neighbours.
They're all gone, are they?
All gone. Mysteriously disappeared.
It's not that mysterious. You just told us what you did to them.
Nope.
Do detectives, and like a lot of detective stories are obviously like in the past, but if you bring them into like a modern time, do they become more a scientific kind of inspector because it's like gadgets and technology and things like that, where our inspector stories that are like 50s, 60s, 70s better stories because it's about deducing things and seeing clues and figuring out where like a normal person is doing it, that has just had really heightened sense of being able to, like Sherlock Holmes can read like tweaks, or he was thinking a little bit quicker than more people, or like are they more fun to write rather than someone who like is in a lab and he's like assessing things and kind of gets the clues a bit easier?
I think it's broadened the genre. So I think there, you know, the likes of CSI, and there's and some writers who will really get into the scientific advancements and make the most of that and capitalize on that, and that's a whole other way to tell a story. There's people who will go down the kind of technological advances, but my favorite thing is to put people somewhere remote, turn off the electricity, you know, cut them off from the outside world, create a sort of a sense of danger, that they're locked into a house with a killer. So they can't wait for an autopsy result. They can't wait for that because they're actually in danger at that moment in time. I mean, that's the classic locked room mystery. That's Murder on the Orient Express, and they're all stuck in the train carriage. but that does give crime writers, and Lucy Foley, she does it very well too. It gives on Supper for Six, there's a mysterious gas explosion on the streets of London that keeps everybody locked up.
Right.
So yeah, there's techniques that you can work around that, and you can still get to that essentially person to person deduction with a few little clues and red herrings and reading people and trying to read behaviour.
Yeah, I think they're more interesting, as I said, for people, because you feel like that you're trying to solve it yourself. Where when it comes to like CSI and all that, you at home don't have that equipment.
Absolutely.
So you can't like invest yourself in trying to figure it out as the book goes on. Like,
yeah, and I mean, I think new crime writers can kind of fall into the trap of waiting for the lab report to come back and there's a clue dump and everything there, and people aren't expecting it, and they don't feel like they've kind of earned it, so they don't value it. Whereas if somebody's like, oh, that one, there's something about that one now, and your man, there's something there, and then if they see another, oh, there's something, oh yeah, well, okay, her scarf, if they see that clue progression and they feel like they're in on it, that they've had some level of foresight, then they're bought into it, and they're just more invested, instead of just, right, there's the autopsy report and that's the results.
As a result of your writing, do you find that you're ever in a room and you look around the place, you're trying to figure out what's going on? Do you ever play investigator by yourself?
Sometimes I do.
You ever get kicked off a crime scene? Like, walking, who are you? Get out of here. It's a serious question.
Have I been kicked off a crime scene? No, I haven't. Not yet.
You had to think about that for a second, though, didn't you?
No, where can they connect me to? But would you love to pick the brain of like a homicide detective from Dublin?
You see, that is why I like to write a cosy crime. That's sort of my genre. So this is the Agatha Christie school, where yes, there's a body, and yes, there's been a murder, and yes, there may be some blood or a contorted face, but that is as far as it goes. And I actually have I struggle with true crime. And even when I was researching and listening to Serial and West Cork and all the usuals for Supper for Six, I do find it hard, because they're real people and they're real victims. And I suppose that's one thing that as a crime writer I'm sort of conscious of, in that, serious violence has serious consequences, and we're talking about it as light entertainment. I do try to make donations to charities and things like that who look after victims, and I do just, it's there in the back of my mind. And actually I did an interview with BBC News, which was a very nerve-wracking event.
Say so.
I did that during the pandemic, and somebody tweeted that they were horrified because their friend had been murdered in South Africa, and there was no resolution for the case, and they were deeply upset by seeing this on the news first thing in the morning.
Wow.
So there are those kind of, and I'm reading the Dao De Ching a lot at the minute, and there's a verse in there about not supporting violence and not supporting weapons, and
it's over. I think it's over there somewhere as well. Dao De Ching. It's in that little. Is it beside the philosophy one there, John? Is it the Dao De Ching?
Did you just put these books here and there?
No,
those books are never there.
That's a pure coincidence, that one.
Yeah.
There you go.
You used to keep these under the table. Why are they on the windowsill?
They're never over there.
So yeah, it kind of discourages the use of violence. So
Did you read this, Kelly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you read pieces of it. It's not really you read all the way through kind of thing.
Right, okay.
You can just pick at it. It's nice.
I read the Wayne Dyer one, and he says do a verse a day.
Right, yeah.
And then he gives his own little interpretation of it.
There you go.
Questions about this later?
Yeah, you can take that with you if you want.
You might.
Yeah, you should. It'll enlighten you greatly.
I will.
You'll come back next week and you'll be no crack whatsoever.
No, not yet.
He's completely enlightened. I don't eat chocolate anymore.
Sorry, no chocolate. Chocolate's violent.
You even forgot the chocolate this week.
I'm not driving a car anymore. It could hurt someone.
So, what's the future for you? Is there anything that you any way you want to take this, or any sort of exciting little advancement that you want to take your writing in?
I really want to keep going with the metaverse side of storytelling. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to create a similar experience, because I feel like it will feel familiar to people because they're used to the TV shows and books or whatever. So that's what I'm really interested in, and actually building the kind of the venue. I have really since I started doing my masters and I started working on my Mary Lavin project, I have enjoyed creative non-fiction and then getting back to writing kind of featuresy pieces. So I have a piece in the ski supplement of the Telegraph in a couple of months' time about this mad competition called ski joring.
Right.
Where up until this year, Ireland were the reigning champions. And it takes...
Ski joring.
Ski joring. So you're basically pulled behind a galloping horse on a set of skis. And
Class.
Team Ireland, they went over and represented us in 2020 and they won. They went to Calgary.
Were they from Limerick?
They were from Navan.
No way.
Is this like a Cool Runnings kind of thing? We had no snow, but we managed to be able to
How
ski.
did they do that?
Absolutely. So it was held in Calgary in Canada, and I'm friends with them, and they said, "Oh, well, we need somebody for the relay race. Would you be fit for it?" And I was like, "No."
They're asking you to do it with them.
Yeah.
What?
So anyway, I said, I would love to go to Canada. So I decided to put a pitch together for the Telegraph. So at least then I got a commission, and I was actually had a legitimate reason to go.
Lovely.
And see that kind of crazy world, which is like a kind of a Western cowboy
So
vibe.
is it on snow?
It's on snow.
And is there a horse and a rider and a ski person, or is the ski person guiding the horse?
Like a chariot.
But that's
Is the
actually-
horse on skis?
You're pulling the horse on skis, Bertie. That's the game.
Do you
I think
it's a
you're going to
ski
have
jump?
to do a ski jor episode because there's so much in it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
No, like the horse. There's a rider who directs the horse and somebody on skis. So when I did do the relay
Right.
race, I was on skis.
Is there photos of this and stuff we can put up? Like we put it up in our stories and stuff.
Yeah,
Oh, we're gonna
Oh
check
my
that out.
God. Can you put us in touch with them? We'll have a chat with them.
Yes.
I will indeed put you in touch with them.
Please
Brilliant.
do. They're in Havant as well. Brilliant.
Yeah, Susan Oakes was the rider and Barry O'Brien Lynch was the slider, is what they call the skier.
This is epic.
I know him. I know him, actually. That's mad. That's a crazy old coincidence. He lived out by... Oh, well, I can't tell you where his address is, actually. Old Johnstown direction, anyway. He's from that area, isn't he? Old Johnstown
But
area.
they have a great story, and they did a lot of media around this time around their training routine, so they will tell you much about it than tell
I
you.
feel like
Crazy.
this is a Rocky 4 thing where like they didn't have the technology to train and they're out like
Made
on
them better.
little ponies and they don't
The
really
horse,
know
the
how-
horse on the treadmill. The where you're saying where you're going next. Are you concerned about AI technology?
No, and I'm actively exploring it myself.
We use that a lot in work, and it's incredible what it can do.
It is, I think in terms of like what a writer might do to make a clip, like copywriting or website writing, that's a challenge because like the AI is doing that as good as anybody
Yeah,
else.
it's a danger technically, isn't it, to writers?
It is. No, it is, because that's the kind of paid sort of stuff that's going to pay the bills. Where I don't think it's going to get, and it's never going to capture the uniqueness of somebody's voice, somebody's lived experience. And I have been playing around with it. I've asked it to write stories in my style, by giving them a book and seeing where they've gone with it. And I think that it still kind of doesn't really resonate. Now, maybe there's going to be scope there for, poorly written ebooks or whatever. But,
kids are using it for their assignments in school. I've been told by a teacher, and like they handed in like whatever the assignment was, and like it was an A in the assignment, and he questioned him because like you actually spelled your name wrong last week. How have you gotten this? And he says it's so obvious that they're using it like in school and everything. Like
There's I don't know if you know Casey. Do you know Casey Neistat? You ever see that guy? He's a director, kind of filmographer, and he does like a video blog post, and he used AI to write a vlog, and then he went and did out the whole vlog and filmed it as AI said that he should, and his ultimate what's the word I'm looking for? His conclusion with it was that it lacked soul, and it just landed in that uncanny valley where you're not quite sure if it's a human or if it's a robot, and it just freaks you out a little bit. But ultimately, that the soul was missing from whatever it was putting out.
Great way to put it. That's,
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting.
It's a great way to put it. You know, but I do think it's kind of like a little intern. That's what I've been using it as, a little intern. You know, write me up a little proposal for this.
Yeah,
you know,
handy.
Actually rewrite that again in a funnier voice. Actually, that's too funny. Rewrite it again in a little bit more corporate tone. So I'm trying to like school it and see how far I get with it.
Bully it, in other words.
Yeah, because you know they say that you know that now is the time to make loads of money with AI, and if you get in on it right now, you know, but you know who made the most money during the gold rush? People selling the shovels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like that. Right, will we move on? Is there anything that you'd like to tell us about before we move on?
Where can we buy the book, I suppose?
Antonia, I must have to give a shout out to Antonia's in Trim.
Right.
Antonia and the girls in there are amazing. They've always been so supportive, and they've always, like, anytime I'd ever launch, they let me go in and sign all the books. Easton's and Navan are great as well.
Brilliant.
And you know, to have those Irish independent smaller bookshops.
And online, can you buy it online if you're...
You can absolutely buy it online, and I'm sure if you type in Fiona Sherlock books, you'll find a few
Fiona
places
Sherlock
to buy it
books.
from.
Yeah.
So keep it local is what you're saying.
Keep it
Well,
local.
keep it local.
Yeah,
Keep it local.
yeah, perfect.
It's that time, you know the name. It's the reason we all came. Find the words that are the same. It's that time to play the waffle game.
All right.
In 30 seconds, Fiona, can you name 5 famous serial killers?
Ooh.
Ed Gaines, Jack the Ripper, Charles Manson,
Yeah, keep going.
It's so
sorry,
bad. isn't it?
dead air. Sorry.
Crazy how your mind can go blank. Yeah, trust me, it's mad.
The two boys from In Cold Blood, and
Yep.
Okay, that's
Time.
It is crazy how your mind can go blank no matter how good you are at the subject.
I can't believe I only got 3.
Yeah, it's madness.
But I mean, I don't think serial killers essentially is your wheelhouse, right? It's more. It's more.
I should still know. I should still be able to name 5 in 30 seconds. Really.
Well, you got Jack the Ripper,
Yeah.
but that's the only one you got off my list.
Okay.
Okay, so we had Ted Bundy,
Yes.
Jeffrey Dahmer,
He's a big one now at the moment,
Yes.
isn't he?
John Wayne
commercial
Gacy,
killers.
Yeah, John Wayne Gacy. Yeah.
and
I've never heard of that guy. Chicalito.
yeah,
Oh, Chikatilo. Sorry.
that person.
Chicalito. No, I haven't either.
Oh, okay.
No,
That was just off Google.
He must be a Mexican serial killer.
That's my homework. That's going to keep me up for the next 6 months.
Calito.
There you go.
So one out of 5.
Nice work.
It's not bad. I've got
Yeah.
0 in that
We've
game
got
before.
0.
So
Well,
don't worry
Benny
about
only
that.
got 2 last week, and they're all names of axes. Which
Yeah.
I thought he'd get.
He works with axes.
You know? It's the 30 seconds. It puts pressure on people.
It really does, in fairness. All right, will we do
Yeah.
our... Sorry, go on.
I often just Google my research all the time as well. So.
That's 95% of this podcast. Is just the first
I-
Google result.
I googled on the way up the stairs.
There's been a few occasions when we take a topic and we would just go and research it, and myself and Bertie will arrive in with the exact same research to the key.
There was one week that I picked like the 8 search results on Google, and it managed to be the same one that he picked.
Exact same. So we don't research too deep, in fairness.
Maybe ask ChatGPT to do both of your research for you. So
There
that
you
it's
go.
Not overlapping.
That's why I don't research, lads. He was slagging me this morning that John doesn't research. Like,
So it's not laziness at all.
It's not,
No,
it's
no,
like-
no.
I
No,
don't
but
wanna
that's
clash.
where the whole waffle team comes in, you know.
waffle.
Coming in cold. I think I like
Bluffing.
it. Yeah.
Bluffing. That's what I call it.
Yeah, no,
I think we're getting away with it so
He,
far.
well, John gets away with it anyway. All right, we do some shell bombs.
Shell bombs.
I've got a few little ones. It's more. Did you know? They're only little small ones.
Yeah.
Did you know that the Greek national anthem, "Hymn to Liberty," has 158 verses? That's the Greek national anthem.
How long are the verses?
Oh, I'm not sure. Then again, I didn't do too much research on this, but it's also used by Cyprus as their national anthem as well.
Cyprus and Greece have the same national
Isn't that
anthem.
interesting?
But they're different countries.
Do you know
I
what?
know, yeah.
Do you know also what was interesting? The same song was number one in Germany and England during the Second World War, called Lily Marlene.
Right.
In England, it was, or in the UK, it was sung by Vera Lynn, and in Germany, it was sung by Marlene Dietrich. And it was the
Right.
same melody, and they sang it in German in Germany and in English in England.
And did they copy each other, or was it just a pure coincidence that?
No, I'm sure it couldn't have been a coincidence
Yeah, yeah,
because it was so similar. But yeah, worth a little Google further.
That's an interesting one. And didn't they stop? World War II came to a halt on, was it Christmas Day?
World War One, yeah, they
Or
called
one,
it.
sorry.
They called a truce to play a game of footy.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? John,
Yes.
do you have anything
Well,
to add?
Oh yeah. Well, Robbie Kennedy.
Oh, for God's
He
sake!
wrote a book.
Right.
Called it the Bible.
For
Yeah.
God's sake. We have a friend called Robbie Kennedy, and he's a bit of, like, he's our Chuck Norris.
He's the Irish Chuck Norris. He does crazy stuff.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff?
I mean, you name it, he hasn't done it.
Like he can slam a rotating door. He once.
She looks so puzzled.
He
I'm just trying to picture.
when Robbie turns off a light, he doesn't turn off the light. He turns on the dark. Like he's one of these guys. That
Okay, this is starting to be stuff I'm going to squirrel away now.
There's going to be a character coming up in a book
incredible
now.
stuff, Robbie. He's just can break the speed of light with his fist. It's unbelievable.
He's Trim's national superhero.
If
isn't
I
he?
showed a
Fairness.
photograph of Robbie, you'd go, "Oh my God, look, that's he's totally how he's described." He has legs for arms.
Show us a photo then.
He has no neck. It's chest and head.
And traps.
He's an amazing man.
Yeah.
Bertie, let's get away from this. Do you have anything that you want to
My
add?
shell bomb is for John.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just to put him at ease the next time he goes to somewhere where I know he doesn't like going.
dentist.
Exactly.
Oh, right.
No.
So I have a name of a dentist here called Alfred Porter Southwick. And do you know what he invented?
The drill.
No, the electric chair.
Oh right.
So he thought it'd be a more humane way to kill people for the death penalty rather than hanging them. So he was
Rogers.
a dentist, a boat engineer, and an inventor.
Okay.
So you can think about that next time you go to the dentist,
Next
John.
time I'm sitting on a chair.
Yep.
Love
There
it.
you go.
Thanks, Bertie.
Shabam.
Maybe
Shabam.
better.
What up?
Shabam.
I saw a great name for a dentist in Kildare. It was called Clane Teeth.